And I find that I like to live in a culturally Christian country, although I do not believe a single word of the Christian faith.
Just for balance.
Exactly. That is exactly the way that I feel. Like, that is word for word exactly what I think.
In a recent video, one of the things that Asmongold talked about is why he is a cultural Christian. He describes it as being an atheist, but recognizing and enjoying the privileges of Christian culture. Some commenters criticize this position. It is intellectually and morally dubious to accept the benefits of Christianity, but not wanting to commit to it. Asmongold responded to these points, and in this video I would like to argue why I find his response severely lacking. The first point that I would like to address is whether his skepticism of Christianity is justified. The main problem I have here is that Asmongold condemns blind and lazy faith, but he himself exercises blind and lazy skepticism.
So faith doesn't exist? It does exist, I just don't respect it. I don't respect blind allegiance to something with no evidence. I think that's a bad thing. I think believing things without evidence is bad. But just accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior then. I just don't believe the scripture. I don't think the scripture provides enough evidence for me to believe in it. It's just really that simple. I don't think there's really a lot else to say about it besides that. I just simply, I read what they're saying and I'm like, it probably didn't happen, right? So that's it.
Being skeptical is not equivalent to being reasonable. For example, if I said, I just don't believe that Isaac Newton existed, because nobody could possibly invent calculus all by himself by age 23. Then I suspect most people would not find my skepticism very reasonable. I could go on to argue why Isaac Newton is a fictional character. See, Newton was supposedly born on Christmas Day, the same day that Jesus was born. So obviously this is symbolism for how Newton is the metaphorical founding father of scientific reason, the same way Jesus was the founder of the Christian faith. It becomes even more clear when you look at the name. Isaac Newton is the new Isaac, son of Abraham, who is the father of all Abrahamic religions. Sure, some people might point to the works that Newton supposedly wrote, or to contemporaries who wrote about him, but it's very easy to just write things down that are not true. It is therefore much more likely that Newton is a fictional character than that somebody so incredibly talented would have really existed. This is obviously very bad skepticism, worthy only of ridicule. And I would say that Asmongold's skepticism of Christianity is of the same kind. To say that scripture doesn't provide enough evidence to believe in it fails to address the wealth of evidence that indicates that the New Testament is historically reliable. The earliest writings and traditions date back to the time when eyewitnesses were still alive, so it's too early for fantastic legends to have formed via a game of telephone. We possess many manuscripts and fragments in their original Koine Greek language, so we know we're not grossly misinterpreting the text due to poor translations. Non-Christian writers, such as Josephus and Tacitus, confirm the existence of Jesus. Archaeological evidence, such as the Pilate Stone and the pools of Bethesda and Siloam, are in agreement with the Gospels. So there is plenty of evidence for their historical reliability. Moreover, during the time when eyewitnesses were still alive, many different kinds of people, Jews and non-Jews, were prepared to die under persecution. This supports the idea that something very significant must have happened, which deeply affected people regardless of ethnicity or traditional background. It would be quite extraordinary if a random Jewish carpenter, without performing any of the recorded miracles, managed to convert the Roman Empire just by being executed as a lowly criminal. Of course, one can come up with all sorts of alternative explanations, but then again, if we're going to allow such creative logic, maybe Isaac Newton didn't exist either. At this point, one can ask skeptical questions about the nature of God. Why wouldn't God reveal himself to me right now if he wanted me to believe? Why does God allow good people to suffer unfairly? How can God be three in one? Those are fair and difficult questions. But unless strong evidence is presented that the Gospels are completely unreliable, those difficult questions have to be explored in the context where we assume that the Gospels are reliable. As an analogy, the theory of quantum mechanics also raises very challenging questions about the nature of reality. But when we try to address those questions, we cannot simply ignore all the experiments that demonstrate the validity of quantum theory. The fact that we cannot comprehend God or quantum mechanics with our limited mental capacity doesn't prove they cannot be part of reality. The next point is about whether Asmongold is honest about his faith, or if he overestimates his reliance on logic and reason.
You have a blind allegiance in many of your faiths? Okay, you're getting pulled up. Like what? Name one. Name one. There are things you put faith in subconsciously, like the logic. No. Make one example of something specific or you're getting banned. You have to be specific. No vague, no vague posting, something specific. I don't like people that do this. They make apples to orange comparisons. Laws of logic? Which one? You can't prove laws of logic, yet you hold faith in that? Can you give me an example? You have one more chance to give a specific example or you're getting banned. I understand what you're trying to say. You're saying that I'm putting faith in logic rather than religion, and these are equivalent. I understand what you're trying to say. You're repeating yourself now. Yes, what you said is just my point. My bad. You're actually getting banned. You're just getting banned. I'm just so sick of reading comments like that. They're so stupid. Like, what are you talking about? Laws of logic are self-evident? Listen, you're not going to argue and debate with somebody like this, right? And there's no reason to ban him anyway. You're so stupid. You're getting banned.
In my opinion, the argument that the commenter presented was valid. Yet Asmongold was extremely unreasonable in his response. First, he demands unnecessary extra details, then he claims he understands the argument, but he refuses to address it. A more elaborate version of the argument is this. If we are nothing more than products of blind evolution, then we can look at other products of blind evolution and see whether we would trust their capacity for logic and reasoning. If we don't trust theirs, why would we trust ours? In fact, through schizophrenics, drug-induced hallucinations, or just optical illusions, we already know that our brains are quite capable of misleading us. So what gives you the confidence that your sense of logic is always leading you to accurate conclusions? In particular, what justifies the faith in the correctness of your moral judgments? Moral conclusions cannot follow from only objective facts and pure logic. So, if you're a materialist, and you make moral statements such as, "It is bad to believe without evidence," then you are demonstrating that you're relying on something more than just facts and logic, whether you like to admit it or not. I think it is a valid observation that some skeptics elevate logic to a godlike status, and that they try to signal their superior logic in the same way that virtue signalers try to show off their superior morality. And when somebody dares to question the supremacy of their logic god, they will silence their critics as easily as any religious zealot would. The next point I would like to address is whether it is morally decent to accept the benefits of Christian culture while refusing to commit to it.
Yeah, obviously, wants the benefit of Christianity without any of the obligations. Well, the obligations are following the law inside of a Christian country. That is the obligation right there. So it's that simple.
The main problem here is that he wants to define his own obligations. If you can pick and choose the obligations you like, and ignore the ones you don't like, then it's not really an obligation, is it? When Jesus was asked what the greatest commandment is, he responded, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind." If you enjoy the benefits of Christian culture, but you completely ignore its greatest commandment, then you cannot really argue that you're fulfilling your obligations. In fact, if your own chosen obligation is to just follow the law, then it reminds me of the Pharisees, who obsessed over the law but had no love for God or people. In my view, the cultural Christians who accept the fruits but not the roots of Christianity are like flat earthers who like to use their GPS on their phones. Of course, you can use your GPS while believing the earth is flat, and you would not run into any problem whatsoever, but for building and maintaining the satellites that GPS relies on, you'd better make sure you have people around who take the science seriously. Similarly, it's easy to be a moderately decent person if the environment allows for it. But when sticking to your morals requires significant self-sacrifice, you'd better have people around who believe morality is real, judgment is real, and the sacrifice is worth it, even when there's no earthly reward. Finally, I would like to comment on the concerns regarding religious zealotry.
What do you dislike about Christians? What I dislike about Christians is what I dislike about any sort of religious group. The main things that I dislike are when there's like a blind adherence to like a faith doctrine without any sort of real like reasoning or logic or anything like that behind it. I think that's the main thing that I dislike with any type of religion, is that like I don't want to have like zealotry, blind allegiance, violence that's being justified because of the behavior, etc. So that's really it. And when they try to enforce things on you, yeah, basically like I don't want to have people's religious reasonings enforced on me when there's not a justification for it that exists logically, right? And so that's the way I see it.
It is unfortunately very true that religious zealotry has been, and still is, responsible for significant harm and injustice. Rather than trying to rank ideologies based on their death tolls, I think we need to go back to the very core of Christianity. From the very beginning, it was made clear that the followers of Christ were imperfect people whom you shouldn't put too much faith in. Matthew was a tax collector for the Roman occupier. Peter denied Jesus 3 times before the rooster crowed. Paul persecuted Christians before he encountered Jesus on the road to Damascus. Judas betrayed Jesus even though he was a close follower. Jesus said he would deny his false followers. Paul, in his letters, sometimes had to call out churches for their wickedness. Therefore, it should be clear that it was never promised or insinuated that the Christian community would consist only of morally superior people. This is why Christianity is not just a set of values or part of a culture. It is about putting your faith in one person only, namely Christ. So, Christianity is not part of Western culture, and it should not be the goal to spread Western culture. Rather, people in Western culture are part of Christianity, and people from many other cultures are also part of Christianity, and hopefully more will choose to join as equals under Christ.